it's Patricia at Book Expo America. I'm joined now by author Elia Dawn Johnson, who has a new book coming out this fall called Love is the Drug. Can you tell me a little bit more about your book?
It's a DC private school novel. It's set in Washington, D.C. It's contemporary, but it has a speculative element because that's the thing that I really love. But in this case, it's that there's a global flu pandemic. And so it's kind of about how Washington, D.C. would be affected by a potential terrorist, bioterrorist attack. And there's all sorts of global things happening, but it's set in this school, and it's from the point of view of a girl who's sort of stuck between these two worlds of Washington, D.C. So there's kind of this very rich, mostly white, very privileged, politically powerful part of D.C., and there is the kind of historically strong black middle class community. And and if you are in one of them, it's very easy to sort of not interact with the other one. And that was sort of my experience growing up in D.C. And so it's my most personal novel to date, and so I wanted to kind of put that in a book. And it's not about my family, it's not about my school, but it's definitely about that experience of having those two worlds. But in this case, there's a global flu pandemic, and so how does that differentially affect those two communities?
Where did you get this sort of influence for creating your character's persona?
Definitely, especially my main characters, I would say I take an aspect of myself that isn't maybe like my most salient characteristic, but it's something that's going on in my head, and I kind of blow it up. So in The Summer Prince, which is my debut YA novel, I have a character who's incredibly ambitious, and I am not as ambitious as this character, but I definitely have that element. And so it's sort of like you can create a different person by rearranging and then seeing where that rearrangement changes things. And so she becomes a completely different person, but I'd say it comes from that. And so with Bird, the main character of Love is the Drug, I was taking a kind of different series of things. And so in this case, I was taking that experience of having these kind of DC private school, that world, and then the other world of my family in Southeast DC. And I was taking someone who was in that world but reacts to it differently than I did. But that was definitely like the spark.
So it seems like your novels have a lot of social commentary mixed with a speculative element. And growing up in DC, what authors influence your writing the most, do you think?
One of my incredible influences was Octavia Butler and her novel Kindred, which I read when I was in 8th grade. It was actually assigned by my English teacher, which when I tell other English teachers this, they go, what? Because, they know what's in it. But that was a hugely transformative book to me. It was the first speculative fiction novel I read with characters of color. It was the first one that dealt frankly with race. It was a major, major novel, and I wanted to be able to do other things with books and with words like that. And another writer who was hugely influential was Diana Wynne Jones, whose novel, especially Fire and Hemlock, just really rearranged the ways that I thought of narrative structure and kind of character reliability, and I really love them.
Yeah, I actually had Kindred assigned to me in middle school as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to young writers who want to pursue writing?
Write. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly, but I know a lot of young writers and older writers who tell me, I've always wanted to write a novel and one day I'll have time, and I'm like, listen, you have time. Even if you have a half hour every day, and you have a pen and you have a piece of paper, you're on the subway, you're anywhere, you have to think of stories and you have to practice, because otherwise that novel will always be in your head, and it's always different in your head than it is on paper. And I think until you have that experience, it's really hard to take that leap. And one thing that I did when I was younger that really helped me was that I wrote some fan fiction. And, there's a lot of online communities now. There's way more than there were when I was in high school. And you have all these opportunities to have your peers read your fiction, and not just fan fiction, but just your original fiction, and take advantage of it and just keep doing it.
Yeah. And it's definitely a lot easier now, especially with like iPads and iPhones, and you can just have things written down.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I heard this phenomenon in Japan anyway, where people were writing novels with their texting programs.
Wow. Yeah.
You can pretty much write anywhere. It's one of those amazing arts that you don't need a studio space. It's nice, but you don't need one. You can write anywhere, and the stories are in your head, and you just need to put them on paper or in a digital format.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Well, thank you so much for your time and insight, Elia. It was great having you.
Thank you so much for having me.